This is the first slide that we had before. What I wanted to do is do a kind of quick review. Then we'll look at the data that we had for our 5 field trips and see if anybody has any questions about IDs. And then I want to wrap up a little bit talking about duck conservation, kind of introduce some of the things that need to be done when we were down in Blackwater, what they're doing there with the impoundments and why they're raising and lowering the water levels and so on. We'll look at how nature does that in a very important part of the United States and Canada pretty soon. All right, who dat? Anybody? We don't have anybody online, so you all can, you don't have to wait for them.
That's not bad. It's a redhead.
That's a redhead. Canvasback is much lighter in the back.
Very similar.
Very similar heads. All right, this is an interesting menage. They at some distance, but can you tell me what they are?
There's a canvasback, and there looks like
Canvasback, are they?
They're all swimming around in circles. Shovelets. Northern shovel. That's their collaborative feeding. There is a drake on the right side, far right side, that you can see. See if this, yeah, this does show up, so I can try it. And you can see the big tan belly band that goes around. Can't see the bills because their heads are almost underwater.
Where did you take that?
That was taken at Berlin, at the Heron Park. And we know that one. We've seen a few bazillions of them.
Yeah.
Right. That is which?
Long.
It's a pintail. That's right. It's a dabbler. I can't show you the behavior in that picture. That's the northern pintail. I have never, and I've been birding a long enough time. I have never seen so many pintail in the last that we saw at Blackwater, and also in Pickering, smaller numbers, but still the same density. Just thousands of them. All right, that's a bit more of a challenge. This is a bigger bird. Yeah. This is our coastal goose, the one we seldom see in the Chesapeake. But does winter off ocean, down in Ocean City, New Jersey, places like that. Has that little neck patch that shows up at some distance. It's bigger. These are not all to scale, so this is bigger than your average duck, but smaller than the Canada goose. This one's smaller than a brant. Surf stoker, good, you're getting there. Skunk head, right? Okay, that's a drake skunk head. Sometimes gets confused, but it's a smaller duck, shorter. That's the bubblehead. Well, hey, you guys are all right. We saw it both on the coast and around here. It's one of our common diving ducks in both open waters and somewhat on a few ponds as well. There's your canvasback. Roman nose canvasback, right? How about that? Which say? Virgin merganser. That one stand out. When the fan is closed, it looks more like a little line over coming out of the back of the head. It's the smallest of the mergansers. It doesn't have the flat duck-like bill. It has the more serrated, thin bill. Very, very colorful. That's a drake. We got looks, not great looks at this time. I was hoping for better. And we'll finish up with this one. This is a small little duck, about the size of it's a duddy ruck. A stiff tail. And its tail is erect in this particular picture, which it usually is. That's a winter drake. Still shows the nice white cheeks. It's not very ruddy, but in springtime it gets a lot rustier on the back, and the cheeks actually contrast even more. Okay, so we just get the old splash screen here, putting up here. This is our second class, sniff, and last, unfortunately. Here's the depressing news that I started the course with. The decline of North American avifauna. That is the paper in Science in 2019, cited often as Rosenberg et al. But there are a lot of very well-known national birders and bird scientists, Peter Mara, Michael Parr, who is an American Bird Conservancy, and several other folks there that stood behind this paper, the data analysis. And cutting to the chase, the big problem there is that with the data that they worked with, which includes eBird, the Christmas bird count, North American Breeding Bird Survey, some radar studies of migrant flocks going across the Gulf of Mexico, and some other sources. They came up with an estimate that we've lost about 3 billion birds, or a third of the North American bird population in the last 50 years. And that's not just here. While this study was confined to North America, worldwide, a paper that came out a little while ago says that 1 in 8 bird species is at risk of extinction. And if we go to Europe, Great Britain has lost about the same proportion, about a third of its birds since I think it's the last 40 years. No, also since 1970. And that accounts for about 70 million individual birds. And 600 million have been lost in the European Union since 1980. So we're looking at a global decline in bird populations, not just limited to here. The paper goes on and blames industrial agriculture for a lot of the problem. But when we look at the real data, it's much more complicated than that. In the North American study, we're looking at data across a variety of what they call biomes, which are groups of habitats that are similar, such as the eastern forest and whatever else we got here. These glasses aren't great. The tundra, shorebirds, and so on. So it varies a fair amount, and the causes are different in some of those. In the spring, we'll actually talk about the eastern forest birds and also the birds that are shorebirds, which are also showing a significant decline. But in that graph, despite the fact that there's an error on the axis on the graph on the right, the error being that that should be a positive number. Okay.
Right.
Someday I'll mouse over it and fix it. It's not my graph. This is actually the original publication. But that should be positive. But the only ones that have been increasing are the wetland species. And that includes our ducks and geese, herons, and other birds that we lumped here under our waterfowl to some degree. But basically, I'm going to talk a lot about ducks this particular class. They've actually increased by somewhere around 16%, something like that, over the last 50 years. The only class or group of birds that have done so. And the question I'll leave you with for the time being is why and how. And we will come back to that. But that's the good news, at least for that bit of bird type. And it may be good news for the others as well, if we look at the principles behind it. Okay. I'm going to leave it there and switch now to go over our data that we've got. We're here now in eBird. I'm going to blow this up so we can see it all. And I've grouped our data into trip reports for our basic 5 field trips. So our first field trip, which was way back in January, the 22nd of January, went to the Cambridge waterfront. Here's the list for the single checklist that we produced here. What I want to do is take down, or even show you, whichever comes first, birds that you might have trouble identifying. In this group, have a problem with snow geese or Canadas, but widgeons, mallards, canvasbacks, scaup, surf scoter you did well with. Had a couple distant views of long-tailed duck on that trip. We had some bufflehead. I got goldeneye, but nobody else did. They were up by the bridge and couldn't relocate them later. Duddy rucks, horned grebes. I'm not going to pay much attention to the gulls and other birds. We did have one little pipit that flew back and forth in front of us in Oakley Street that Van Williams got a nice picture of. Any of those, though, that are giving you problems in terms of concept or unfamiliarity or name or anything at all, and we'll go visit that. And speak up, because I want to fill an hour and a half.
Horn grebe, I don't remember.
Horn grebe, okay. I'll show you a picture of it, then we'll look at it relative to the pie-bill, which is one we saw later. So let me write that down. I did send a picture out with the trip report, I think, or somewhere in there, of a couple. I got a lot of my pictures That's in breeding plumage. This is a small bird. It's bufflehead size, actually a little smaller.
Kind of scary.
This is in breeding plumage, which is gorgeous, and if you're around the chalk tank in late April into June, in late April into May, you may see it transitioning, or may even see some that gaudy. The one we saw looks like that. Okay.
Was that
Two-tone.
in the Cambridge waterfront?
Yeah, we had some there, and yes, I think didn't we get some at Tillman? I'll look when we get to the Tillman. I think we have. Because I went there particularly. This is not my picture, but the picture I sent out was one I took while I was scouting at Tillman the day before the winds blew. And but it's a bird kind of like a ruddy duck, about that size, a little lighter overall in color. Instead of having a totally white cheek, it has a white lower cheek and chin, and a nice contrast with a darker crown, and then it begins to develop those other pictures, those other colors later on. This is a transitioning bird starting to show the tufts that were in the first slide. And this is a immature, which we probably wouldn't see around here. Don't worry about it in flight. So if you do continue to pursue looking at waterfowl on the Cambridge area, particularly over at Sherwood, where we did see them, you may see some birds. There were 5 or 6 there the day before we got there. You may see some of them beginning to show this is a handsome bird. They do not breed here. And in fact, again, I think I'll repeat this. Almost none of the waterfowl that we saw in this course breed in Chesapeake Bay or the Chesapeake region. Okay. The major exceptions that I know of include the pie-billed grebe, if we're talking about grebes, but for the ducks, it's the mallard, the American black duck, which tends to breed down in the marshes, particularly in the Dorchester County marshes. And that's really about it. Some of the bigger birds, like herons and everything, yes, but most of the waterfowl we see here and have made the Chesapeake Bay famous for hunting as well as culinary waterfowl do not breed here. And that's important for this lesson in conservation that we'll talk about later. So that's the horned grebe. Okay. And let's go back to eBird if I can find it. There's the slide. There it is, Chrome. There it is. That's the Cornell lab. I guess that must have closed out eBird, so we'll go back to that. eBird, here it is. So, let me sign back in if I'm not already. Try to keep it this time.
Did it sign you out?
Pardon?
Did it sign you out? Huh.
I had signed in earlier, but I must have
Right.
closed it out. And then password here. I'll try to keep it this time.
Just Wayne Bell.
Oh. Sorry. There we go. Okay, so I'll go back to my eBird. One of these days I'll do a course on eBird. People are still getting it on their phones, and I don't do it all that way. All right, so that was the Cambridge waterfront, and we had problems with horned grebe. We'll look at it again in a while. Okay, then we went to Tillman. Had a very windy day. It was probably the poorest day in terms of conditions for us, but we still got tons of Canada geese. We got greater scaup, some surf scooter. We had to look at them a little bit further away than when I saw them the day before. I got a couple of black scoter that I could point out to a couple of you who were there, but it was tough sledding. Some long-tailed ducks, some buffleheads, some more duddy rooks, the horned grebes that we got at Sherwood, and then some gulls and other types of things. Anything in there that's causing troubles. Not familiar, want to know more.
Can we look at the black scoter, please?
Black scoter, okay? All right, the black scoter, the ones that I saw, the males, have this knob at the base of the bill instead of that highly colored swollen bill that the skunk head has. And it doesn't have a skunk head. It's all black. It's about the same size, maybe a little daintier. But the orange knob shows up rather well in this particular bird. Okay, if we go to the female, it's a little easier to tell. And again, I'll go back and compare that in a few minutes. We can get comparisons here. But in this case, the black scoter looks two-tone. The female looks like she has a little bit lighter cheek. It's still dark and gray, but the cap is much darker, and it usually looks like it's capped like that. So it has that two-tone look. Based on the birds I saw at Tillman, there's about 2 to 1 females, I think, something. So that's the black scoter. There is another scoter in Washington, in Chesapeake Bay, that we do see occasionally, and somebody actually said they may have seen it, and that's the white-winged scoter, which is the only scoter that shows white in the wings, actual flat patch of white, sometimes visible on the water as well. Both the drake and the hen have that. So if you can see a fairly large duck, kind of long and dark, and it shows white patches, that would be the white-winged scoter, not common in the bay anymore, used to be. The two that we typically get, lots of surf scoter and fewer, maybe 10% of them would be black scoters. I got it off Tillman Island. That's the only place when we first stopped at that big parking. Normally, the last 2 or 3 years, not the last 2 or 3 years. Normally, before that, we get quite a few at Ocean City Inlet. It's been disappointing that they haven't been there because they're often enclosed. You can see them mixed with the surf scoters and the drakes and the hens, and you get a nice comparison. No luck this time. Okay, we're all right with the longtails and duddies and all that.
So I was thinking about the stuff, the lesser and greater, because lesser has the little.
Okay, we'll compare those separately. I'll show you a picture right now.
Crest on it.
Did you also review,
Because we didn't get great looks at graders.
did you also review the bottom part?
Sure, glad to do it. That I can do here. All right, let's look at the scaup while we're still on ducks. This would be the grader. All right, the grader which we saw at some distance, I was hoping we were going to see it down at the Rome Point Golf Course because they were in there when I was scouting that previous weekend. But anyway, relative to the scaup, tend to be fairly small ducks, about the size of a bufflehead. They are dark-headed, so sometimes the gunners call them just black heads or bluebills, which you can see when they're in your hand. But in the lesser scaup, there's a hint of a top knot up here. We'll show you that in a little bit here. But for the greater scaup, it's smooth. So if you can see any hint of feathering on the back of the head, consider it a lesser. It's smooth, and in good light, the head has a greenish sheen, which can be seen nicely if they're up close in binoculars, but if you're otherwise you have to see a spotting scope. They tend to be lighter on the side, and the female has a white face, and in her case, the color of the head doesn't help you, but the smoothness of the head does. So if you see a white-faced dark bird, it's a scaup. Then the question is, can you tell whether it's a greater or lesser? And birders, even me, often just say scaup species. When we do the Christmas bird count, I often get a couple hundred of those. People reporting they just too far away or they don't have the optics to be able to resolve the top knot. And so they leave it at scaup spot.
And do the two greater and lessers mingle?
Not too much, and that's a good question. Graders like bigger water, so you'd be more likely to see them on the open part of the bay, off Tillman Island, for example, maybe in the Chop Tank central part, but they seldom show up. Like at Oakley Street, maybe there might be one grader with all the lessers that we saw there. It's a challenge to pick it out, and we couldn't find it. It may not have been there. But lessers like to be a little bit closer to shore. They are both diving ducks, so that kind of behavior is both the same. But they often are closer to shore or in the smaller tributaries and creeks, the graders. That's not a firm rule, but it helps. you can add up these little pieces together, you might be able to identify the bird you're seeing. In flight, greater scaup has a whiter wing patch in the back on the wing, and the patch goes out into the wing flight feathers, but the birders call those the primaries. So the patch extends from here on out into the primaries. That can be seen in good light, and the whiteness of the patch is a clue. It's helpful. In the lesser scaup, the patch is grayer and does not extend out into the primaries, noticeably. So it's a little bit duller overall. These are drakes and there's a hen, so it's the same pattern. That shows up in Cambridge, but again, with a scope view, it's much better. And of course, hunters who lure these guys in with decoys get to see that pretty well. So there are a number of little clues that add up to enable you to maybe get the identification right, but rather than waste an afternoon trying to figure it out, you're probably better off to just write scaup SPA, or you can enter that into eBird that way if you're doing that. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll see another one somewhere closer. You get good identification. We will compare the two. Now, someone asked about bonies.
Yes.
So let's do that. Let's see. Two. Okay. We saw these at the Claiborne Landing. In the summer, they are black-headed and might be confused with laughing gulls, which are a common black-headed gull around here, except that they're up in Alaska by here. And the black-headed gull that's around and breeding around here is the laughing gull. We saw a bird a little bit closer to this. They have this black patch, what's left of the blackhead in the wintertime, behind the ear, I guess you might say. Handsome little thing. They're smaller than the ring-billed gull and daintier. And well, to me, when they sit on the water, the tail is up a little bit higher. They have a flight, because they're smaller, it's more pigeon-like. This is probably closer to what we actually saw at Claiborne. And the thing that really caught our eye was this slice of white on the upper wings without the black wingtips that herring gulls and ring-billed gulls have. Instead, it's flashy white above. It's still a gull, has fairly broad wings. A tern would be much narrower wing. But that contrast with that white with the gray part of the mantle and the black at the trailing edge of the wing shows up real well, even at some distance. When you see that and you see often they're in groups, and you'll often see the groups themselves with these flashes of light and more daintier flight, you're pretty well able to say, hey, that's a booty. We had a couple at Ocean City, and in the spring when the tractors get out and start turning up the ground, you may see groups of them flying after the tractors, picking up worms, along with herring gulls and ring-billed gulls, in which case they'll stand out by the difference. And we've had flocks of 20 to 24, maybe even 30, feeding on the ponds, restored wetlands at Pickering Creek. You can see them from the high platform. They're basically eating small plankton. So what they do is they try to pick, on the water at least, they try to pick these bugs up off the surface. So they have this dipping kind of flight that they use. When they're on the fields, they'll sometimes land, but often they'll just try to pick up the grubs from the air. Dainty little thing, and as gulls go, probably one of the more handsome of them. Okay, so that's Bonaparte's gull, and that was a plus, because then the dead of winter, they're hard to find. Okay, we'll go back to the scaups again in a few minutes. So let's go back now to the trip reports. Get it right. All right. Our third location was the Coastal Treasures trip. That was lots of fun. And the gazillion snow geese at the end of 76th Street with a blue or two stuck in. But you know, when you look at the picture of those snow geese, and then you look at the snow geese we saw down in Blackwater, you begin to get the impression that the Blackwater population, was 10% or so blue geese, whereas there were only one or two that we could see easily at the Ocean City thing. That's a high proportion, in my opinion, of blue geese for the Atlantic flyway. But, what do I know? But in any case, the Ocean City population is more representative of what we usually see. We, of course, had our grant. We got the shovelers collaboratively feeding at Heron Park in Berlin. A few gadwall, more American widgeons. We saw them also nicely at Oakley Street with that beep, beep, beep call, no quacks. Mallards, black ducks, our first redheads, good looks at them. Our first looks at ringneck ducks. We did get a couple of black skirted there. I don't remember them well, but I know I saw females there scouting. Buffleheads, some mergansers. The merganser, the coastal merganser that tends to be in the saltier water is red-breasted. We do get them in the bay too, but usually pretty common at Ocean City Inlet. And then good look at a pied-billed grebe, and then a few shorebirds, burnstones, sanderlings, whatnot. Van Williamson sent me some nice pictures of those. And then maybe our first convincing looks at great blackback gulls, the world's largest gull. Oh yes, and we don't want to forget the loons. We've got to compare red-throated and common loons very easily. Any of those? Probably. Want to know more about it?
Again with the gadwall?
Sure. Glad to. Let me write it down in case we get it. I used to get these at Cook's Hope in the late spring, but not anymore. So it's a dabbling duck. The males look gray at any distance with a black butt, which, like the pintail, sticks its tail in the air when it's dabbling. These guys put their butt in the air, and it's a nice black butt without a white patch in front of it. There's a big white patch in front of it in the widgeon. The males look kind of uniformly gray, lighter on the head. But when you get up close, and this picture begins to show it, there's really beautiful little striations or vermiculations of the feathers themselves. It's a light and dark gray kind of pattern. Rather handsome, but you have to get them close to see that. The female, I often identify her by the male because the company she keeps. She's a browner bird overall with a lighter head, but they tend to always be a few drakes around when they're there. So I would have trouble identifying them by themselves. When they fly, however, the speculum itself has this big white patch. It's green in front, but you can't see that much. So what really shows is this big white patch wing on the trailing edge of the wing. So the bird kind of flickers as it flies. It is a dabbler. It's found in both fresh, well, not much in saltwater, but mainly freshwater ponds, shallow enough for it to tip up. It doesn't do much diving, unlike some other dabblers that might dive a little bit. This guy pretty much feeds with his butt in the air. That's the gadwall. Might appear around here. I do believe some breed not too far away, but I don't know whether they're breeding in Maryland or not. Okay. Oh, sure. Anything else on that list that we need to look at? Widgeon, okay. I'm going to pick widgeon for just a second. Just see, it has a black butt too, but it has this big white spot. So it's.
Feathers are very different on that one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's not as gray. It's much browner. Of course, if you get a good look, the head shows up beautifully. But at a distance, and when it's they're feeding and its head is down a lot, you'll see this double patch in the rear. And that was, of course, you got to know that bird really good, up close and personal at Oakley Street. Our dabblers there were mallards and widgeons for the most part, and our divers were canvasbacks and lesser skull. And 4 species. Okay, are we okay? Anything else? All right. Go back to, that was our coastal trip. Then we'll go to Pickering Creek. We did just one checklist there. Fairly good, an overflight of snow geese. They were not on the ground. We saw a couple of blues with them. Lots of Canadas honking away. Our first good looks at swans, tundra swan. flew over us, I believe. I don't think we had any water. Shovelets, a widgeon picked out, mallards, lots of pintails, most I've ever seen there. And then distant looks, but good looks at green-winged teal. Then we had some nice eagles and some other birds as well. But again, I'm homing in on the waterfowl and the ducks in particular. Anything here that is a problem. For the most part, these birds were becoming familiar. Our swan is compared to the mute swan, which is the introduced one, the swan of the ugly duckling, basically. The tundra swan has a straight neck that holds its head high. It often has a yellow patch on the fairly large bill here, and the feathers are seldom, if ever, arched up over the back. It's a fairly smooth, thin type of back. I'm pointing that out because mute swans, which used to be fairly common here, DNR has successfully managed to eradicate from this area because they were ripping up the grasses and interfering with the breeding of some of our native terns, gulls, and for that matter, some other ducks that do breed here. So they were messing up habitat. They were introduced, they're very pretty, it was controversial, it still is. If you want to see mute swans, go to Blackwater, go to Bombay Hook. There's some resident populations breeding there. And if we do that course and go to the Bombay Hook, we'll see them, I'm fairly sure. But it's that straight neck instead of a curve, graceful curve, and the no arch feathers that gives them away. If there were mute swans around, they would not be in groups. They would not be migrating in V's and calling in the sky. Of course, we saw lots of them in Blackwater.
Are they the only two, the tundra that you see around?
Right. There is a new swan coming into our area here, and it's a rare bird at the moment. But there's some evidence it's reestablishing itself in the east after having been eradicated here. And that's the trumpeter swan, which is even bigger than these swans. I would probably have trouble identifying it unless there were just a few of them together with some, for comparison. It's slightly bigger, it has a much more bellowing call, hence the name trumpeter. And its center of distribution right now in the United States is around the Yellowstone Park area, fairly resident. But there are apparently a couple breeding over in Anne Arundel County now, and a couple breeding up in somewhere in, I think it's Montgomery County. So they may be getting to be established in Maryland. One of the real issues with that is there's a bill now before the state legislature to legalize shooting tundra swans. And tundra swans are declining in this area, populations in winter. They're not so much because they're dying, because they're wintering further south in the Carolinas, but they are declining in this area. And I defy any gunner to be able to identify a trumpeter swan separately from tundra swan. So we hope the bill will not get any traction. Apparently it comes back every year. So far, Maryland has not adopted it. Even if we were to try to adopt it, we could still have to have permission from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a migratory waterfowl to establish a season. But the difficulty of identifying the two, especially when one is coming in and maybe getting reestablished, wow, that would be terrible.
Is the trumpeter swan as destructive as the mute swan?
No, not at all.
Okay.
And they don't breed here.
Okay.
Don't mount anything.
So,
They breed here.
so it would be a good thing if the trumpeter swans reestablished themselves.
Yes, if they never established themselves quite as numerous as Stogies.
Yeah.
I think it would be really cool. They were, I wouldn't say abundant, but they were definitely here in the post-colonial days for some time, but they got extirpated. There's a fairly good population in Canada and in the Yukon area and up into Alaska. So, yes, so basically the two swans to look for here would be mute and tundra. And if we hear about a rare trumpeter, there have been a couple down in Dorchester County and so on. You could go down and chase them and see the difference between the two. I don't know of any local right now. Okay, and again, we saw lots of them and got to hear lots of them down in Blackwater. Anything else on this list?
I know we didn't see one, but did we get the blue wing teal here?
No, we do get it here.
Okay.
It tends to be a migrant passing through. There are a couple of them that are occurring in a wildlife management area in Delaware, north of Bethany Beach. There's a wildlife management area there. They've been reported all winter.
Okay.
We do get it. I've seen them in Pickering occasionally, just a couple. In April, one of the better places to find them is Deal Island down in Somerset County. I think that's Somerset. And they tend to be a population down there, but they move through for the most part. They're found in the east. They're a little bit more common in the west, Pacific. The Mississippi.
Okay.
Could you show the green wheel? I mean, I remember seeing it, but I don't. it was
Sure.
a little far away.
Glad to do it. Here.
Oh, yeah.
If we have time, we'll look at the blue one too, just for fun. Okay. Field mark for this one, vertical line, not a triangle, not a big patch, but a vertical line from the water line up in front of the wings. In the drake, the head is reddish or brownish, I guess, almost canvasback color, not quite as bright. And it has the green slash from behind, from the eye down the back of the neck. Not unlike what the widgeon has, only because of the contrast in the colors, it doesn't show up quite as well. It's iridescent. It has now been lumped together with another teal called the Eurasian teal. And in the Eurasian teal, there's no vertical line. The white on the side is along the scapulars, that is just above the wing. Otherwise, they look very similar. Actually, the head pattern is a little bit different, a little bit more pronounced than the Eurasian, but you have to see a good one to see it. This is, of course, in the drake. I could not separate the hens. The hen looks like this, fairly nondescript. Once in a while, you can see a patch of green in the wing because they have a green speculum. It's a small duck, smaller than a mallard, so in a mixed flock that goes off the water. It's a dabbling duck. They all spring up like this. The smaller birds are going to be the teal. Generally green wings, and it has a greenish speculum, but the size kind of gives it away, and when we compare it to blue wing, which we'll do in a minute, you'll see there's some difference.
They're a little bit similar like the widgeon.
Similar, but much smaller, much smaller. Patch back here is kind of creamy, and whereas the widgeon has a black buck, has white and then black, this is all white. And that does show up well. But this patch here, really, if you can see the birds in binoculars, you probably see this. And so that's a giveaway for it itself.
Amazing colors on there.
And aren't they beautiful?
It's stunning. Stunning, yeah.
There are a number of clues when you see a bird like this. One is where it is, because these are fresh water for the most part. They're not going to be on the coast, at least not in salt water. Fresh water, size, they're dabblers, if they do any, but you can tell they're dabblers also because they won't run along the water when they fly off. When you spook them, they're up. If you get a look at it, this crescent here. So there are really four contributing bits to getting the identification right. And you don't have to remember them all, but they'll all come back to you. That's the green wing teal. We'll look at the blue wing in a minute because that was a good question. Anything else there? Remember the greyhound of the sky, the northern pintail. Okay. All right, let's go back and do the last one, and that's Blackwater. Okay, we had several checklists there, and the trip report melds them all together, so we get one species. 4,000 snow geese, and that might have been fairly accurate for the day we were there. I probably saw twice that many scouting in the wind a couple days before, Saturday before. Lots of Canada geese, as if I counted them. When I see groups like that, I just guess, try to estimate. Tons of tundras there, especially on our last stop when we went around the corner onto Key Wallace Drive. A bunch of shovelers, couple of widgeon, kind of distant views, a bunch of mallards. We did have some decent looks at black duck, especially in the first stop. Tons of pintail, but not paving the pasture as they were 2 days before. One canvasback. Lots of ringnecks, especially in the first pond. A lot of lesser scaup. We were inland and they were on the water. Some surf scoter. Oh, these were birds that we saw at Cambridge. Lesser scaup, surf scoters. Cambridge came through for us there as we stopped the sail winds before we left. Long tails, bufflehead. One lone ruddy that I saw and I couldn't relocate it for you. We had the snipe there in that little wet pond. We saw a nice comparison of lesser and greater yellow legs. I had to justify the lessers for eBird. Apparently the graders arrived sooner. A few dunlin, and then some gulls and herons and so on, and a bunch of eagles. We didn't see the golden. By the way, the hawk that we looked for was seen that day in the afternoon. I didn't see it.
Can you
But
show
none
us
the more.
snake in the Dunlin?
Sure, dunlin. Okay, we see them in winter. So if you take the spring course, we'll see them looking like this. In some old books, it's called the red-backed sandpiper. And they have this nice rusty reddish back, sometimes even more striking than this, and this black belly patch. The ones we saw are these little mice, mousy colored on the back, whiter below. Key thing for them among our winter waterfowl is this long, slightly decurved bill. The other shorebird that we saw there was sanderling, which is very white in the wintertime, and it has a much shorter bill, stout and short. It's a handsome bird in the tundra period. We'll see that transition in the spring term, and by the time we get to Bombay Hook, most of them will be looking at least like this. Big bird. Okay.
You ever see the American flag that they fly?
Absolutely. Yep.
Because when they fly over the green or two.
Okay. Good. Okay. A very dark bodied duck, otherwise patterned a lot like the female mallard, but dark, and the head contrasts with that dark body. The best thing about it is, well, there are two things about it. If you get a good look at the speculum, in the black duck, actually, that's a lousy one because they're iridescent. In the black duck, it's usually purple, but the sun is catching this one wrong. But here's the one you really want to see. In flight, the white wing line is really contrasts with the body. And the mallard is nowhere near like that. So it really flashes. And again, being they're dabbling ducks, they can spring from the water. So when they do that, that flash really shows up well. They're not as common in mallards, and we're a little concerned about their future because they do hybridize with the mallards that are released for hunting purposes. So there's some breeding going on there, but they do breed down in the Dorchester marshes, where if you drive down toward Elway's Island, you may flush some and see them. Because they have been hunted, they're fairly shy. So they tend to spring out. If they see you coming around the corner, they may jump in front of you. But in which case, it makes the identification usually pretty simple. But it's like a dark-bodied hen mallard. We'll go look at that comparison shortly. Since what I had mentioned, you asked about the shorebird. Snipes that we saw, pictures I could show you, don't do it justice standing in the mud there, but that very, very long bill, a chunky shorebird, like a killdeer that's been compressed. And these stripes, these longitudinal stripes in the back, which I call snipe stripes, show up when the bird's walking. Striped head as well. Very long bill, likes mud, and in the springtime will be in wet puddles and areas that have just recently lost their water but are still very dead. And they're feeding worms, bugs in there. And sometimes in groups of 20 or so. They'll all flush at once. When it flies away, they zigzag. I have never been accused of taking anyone on this course on a snipe. Pick up we didn't have, either that or I didn't put it in. I thought we did see some Sanderlings down there. Maybe I didn't get it. Okay, anything else on that particular list?
You missed the star of the show.
The star of
Is
the
the great
show.
Howard Dow on that list?
Oh, on that list, of course, he's there.
Okay. She.
Yeah, it is a she. I looked it
Oh,
up to
there you
make
go.
sure. I looked up two things that I couldn't really answer completely when I was asked in the field. One was, do the sexes share incubation? And the answer is no, she stays put, and the male brings her food. He helps then when the chicks are hatched. But it's all a she, so definitely mama owl. The other thing had to do with the blue coloration in the snow geese, and I could not find any reference to the theory that I had heard years ago, that they warm up quicker when they get to the tundra, and it gives them a slight advantage when they're arriving early. So I don't know if that's still true, but in my cursory look around, I could not find any reference to it.
Can you click on that again? Be nice to see her again.
Pardon?
Can you click on the owl again?
And the owl, sure.
See the whole
Of course,
pond?
this is not my
Great
shot.
Howard Dow.
Go up.
This is not my shot.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing, this is actually, I'm trying to think where this one is. This looks pale, so this might be in Arizona.
Yeah, our owl is better.
Our owl is more like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do have this white chest.
Did the owl, I guess you took the picture.
Yeah,
Did it have one eye open, one eye closed?
the two that I had, I think I picked the two that had at least open eyes, although they were slightly closed.
What I was wondering, is this the kind of bird that closes one eye and keeps one open?
It could.
But we saw them with both eyes.
Yeah,
Both eyes are
Yeah.
I saw green ones.
I made 5 or 6 pictures, and a couple of them had a blink.
It did look pretty owl.
We got to see about that much of it. But she was awake, yeah.
That's spiders.
A neat bird.
But it's just never head. Yeah.
Maybe yesterday, for all I know.
Yeah.
That owl is on the webcam at Blackwater, so if you go down there, you can actually check it out. I think they should be pretty close.
If they can, it's like they ever shot.
And apparently the eggs have been exposed once in a while. People said there are 2.
Sure too.
They think there might be another one maybe.
No, that'd be cool. Yeah. So,
They hatch them.
and it's easy bird to find there, just be careful.
That's pretty fast.
Yeah. So,
Little puffballs
Great.
there.
yeah, that was the star of the show. Okay, anything else that, we need? Okay, I was looking for Sanderling, but in fact, they were on the previous, so let's look at that if I have.
That ocean.
Yeah, I have a second here. That was on the Ocean City.
After
That's
the show,
correct. And
cormorants.
we saw some cormorants also the last day, sitting on the pilings under the bridge from the,
Still ones.
from Sailwinds, that's right. Trying to think of 2 going at the same time. So,
This is Pickering.
yeah, that's Pickering. Gotta go back one more. There we go. So we looked at the Dunlin picture and, we have, so again, Sanderling, this is the sandpiper you're gonna see in August if you go to the beach, running back and forth with the waves, and it'll look like that, nice and brown. But what we saw is this one. Okay, it's our whitest shorebird. There aren't too many shorebirds that winter here. Most of them winter in South America, as far south as Terranville, Plagueville. And we'll talk a lot about that in the spring course. But it's the whitest shorebird in the wintertime here. Stouter bill has a little bit of a dip in the end, but it's not that long with a D curve that the Dunlin has. It's not mousy above. It's spotty, I guess you might say. And when it flies, it has this nice wing stripe that shows up quite well. And that's true also in the summertime. So if you see a brown bird going back and forth like the clockwork orange, and they fly off and you see the white stripe, that's standard. I have trouble identifying them in the summer because I don't seldom see them that way. And I'm not at the beach all the time, so. But anyway, it's probably when you think sandpiper, you'll probably think sand. Neat bird. Okay, that's basically that. Now, we had a couple here that people wanted to look at. It'll take a couple of minutes to do this. All right, we'll go to, let's see, here. Big trip, Cornell. And we'll go to all about birds here, because this will allow us to compare a couple of species. There we go. Need the ad. All right, and let's look at, people want to look at the black scoter. Oops, they don't take four layers. Okay. So once again, this bird, a fairly large duck, mallard size, a little bit more elongate, has this rather interesting knob at the base surrounding its nostril. That's the adult male. Female, as I said, is two-toned. So you see a dark-bodied duck with this two-tone, and then somewhere down here, if I go back, I think I can compare it. Yeah. So here's the white, here's surf scoter, here's surf scoter female. All right. This shows the black scoter male. There's the black scoter female. These have two whitish patches, not always this clear, on the side of the head, on each side of the head. This lacks the whitish patches. Instead, it has the cap and the white side. So, and the white wing scoter, which we also had, go back. There are all kinds of stuff up here now. Yeah. All right, white wing scoter has this really interesting stuff. It has all this white in the wing. Okay, and so otherwise about the same size. And the head of the white wing scoter has those two patches as well. But usually, even on the water, you can see some white in the wing on the white wing scoter. These guys never have any of it, so that helps. You may see them at on Chesapeake Bay. All right.
So the bill, is it shaped that way for a reason? Does it
Good question. I don't know for sure.
something
Yeah.
in there or?
Yeah, I would have to say that it's sexual selection, that the gaudier bill is selected for by the females in the drake, and it's the result of that kind of selection. But there are glands in the upper part of the bill that are used to get rid of extraneous salt, since these birds drink salt water,
Oh,
and there may be something to do with that. But not all ducks have it, and not all sea ducks have it, so,
Yeah.
you know. All right, let's look at our skull.
Are their numbers pretty high?
Of which one?
The scoters?
Scoters? Surf scoters seems to be pretty common. We saw it in several places. And when we saw one, we usually saw more. They were down a bit at Ocean City. The scoter population in Ocean City used to be a lot higher. They're still there, but particularly, but they're mostly surf. And we were lucky this year. We had some pretty good looks at longtail ducks. So that helped out a little bit. Here's the lesser skull. Again, just a hint. Okay, but enough. Here's the female. Still, see the hint? See it there. Okay. Purplish sheen to the head. These sides are pretty white. Sometimes they're grayer. And the female, again, has the white face. But where it occurs in terms of being closer to shore instead of on the big water, any hint up here is useful. And often the sides themselves are grayer, and in flight, they have one shown here or not. Let's see. Let's see what the gallery shows. It's grayer, this stripe, it's grayer, it's not as bright white, and it doesn't really extend into the primaries that's visible. Yes, it does, but you don't see it very well because the contrast isn't that good, especially at a distance. So that's that wing stripe. So as I say, you kind of just hit all the possibilities and try to illuminate those you can, having done that. Okay. Go down here a bit. And here, greater scalp. This is comparing with lesser, so let's just do. So this is lesser and greater. And here, actually, they showed a little bit. I might call that a greater. I mean, a lesser. But there is the greenish sheen to the head. But here, it's usually more pronounced. In the pictures I showed you earlier, this is usually pretty smooth. So there are variations, and then you wind up with scop spot. Okay. And don't be ashamed. Okay.
With a green neck.
You want to ring that?
No, it was compared to the green neck down there.
Yeah, okay. Showed that.
Similar.
Good. Yeah, here's a ring neck comparison. I think most of you won't have a problem with that. This has that much puffier head overall. Has the bill ring on it. Has this triangle coming up from the water, which really shows up quite a ways away. So the head shape is very different. And you see the neck ring?
Yeah, that's what I was.
It actually is right in there. I can't see it. But the hunters can, apparently. So that's how they.
Ringnecks are more freshwater?
I see them mostly on fresh water, yeah, even though they're a diving duck. I don't see them much on open water or in the, like from Cambridge or anything like that. I've always seen them on smaller puddles and ponds. And they still have to run along the water, but they're small enough that they can get, 20, 30 feet and get in the air fairly quickly. Okay, so we got the scaup. Let's see, yeah, well, let's do the teal here. So I can show you the blue wing. There's a nice handsome thing. Again, not a triangle, but a line from the water. There was the Eurasian that we showed you before. Okay. Again, I can't separate the hens, so that would be a tough one. But we're asking about the blue wing teal. So here's the comparison. Very different looking birds. They're both small. They're both, in a bunch of dabbling ducks that spring up from the water, these would be, could be either one, but most likely they're going to be green wings. But the blue wing teal has this lovely crescent in front of a bluish head. Very different body. People who tie flies for trout often use these for the bodies of flies. Doesn't have this mark. So you probably wouldn't have any trouble telling them apart. And in flight, blue wing has that bright blue forewing, which really shows up. It almost glows. It has a green speculum, as does the green wing teal. But that's not the thing you would see. So it has that beautiful, beautiful blue forewing. Shoveler has a bit of that too, so you have to be a little bit careful, but this is a small duck. This has got a very rapid wing beats, and of course it doesn't have the huge shoveler bill. Turns out shoveler is actually a glorified teal. Bill and size and everything else are very different, but it is in fact. So this is a bird that we'll see occasionally going through, particularly in spring. Less so, I've seen very few of them in the fall. But they do come along this neck of the woods, and I have seen them in Pickering Creek. And when I have seen them, I've seen them in the newest, deeper wetland. That is, when we're facing out there looking at all the ducks, the wetland that's behind us, that big pond that's behind us is deeper, and they tend to hang out in the grasses on the right-hand side of that. So, and they may spring up, in which case that makes it easy. Okay, then, okay. I want to get to this other piece, so let's do we'll do the black duck. Okay. Uh, yeah. You want to
The
get
American black duck.
It's right there.
Oh, yeah, it's right there.
It's under.
Just go down, Wayne.
go down further?
No, stop, stop.
Okay, yeah, there. Oh, I see, they stuck all these other guys. I guess I was looking under similar species. Here's the American black duck. Here you see the darker speculum than the blue of the mallard.
Yeah.
The contrast of the head to the very dark body, and this one shows the wing lines as well. If we go down to compare it with the hen mallard. Okay. The mallard is more uniform in the body, not as dark, and its speculum is blue, and it has these white lines. The black doesn't show up, but the white lines on fore and aft on the speculum. Black duck doesn't have that. So when you see mallards in flight, you'll often see the white tail as the drake flies away from you, and you may see the speculum, and especially the white lines show up if the color doesn't. And then the flash of white in the wings in the black duck. Okay. All right. Any questions? Couple seconds here. All right. Now let's go to a slideshow here. All right, as I said, most of our waterfowl for which the Chesapeake Bay is so famous are winter residents only. So that's one reason we do this course at that time of year. We could visit wildlife refuges at any time, but won't see many ducks. So where do they breed? If you look at the range maps, if you go to Merlin or any other source, or look at your field guides and see the range maps, you'll see that most of the ducks breed north of us. The sea ducks often in the Canadian Shield and up around Newfoundland and up in this area, sometimes in the Hudson Bay area. A lot of our other puddle ducks in this region here. But the most important region is a region called the Prairie Pothole region, which is located in the upper Midwest and what were originally some of the old Great Plains, part of Minnesota, maybe a third of South Dakota and North Dakota, and then up into Saskatchewan, Alberta, and a little chunk in Montana. This is the Prairie Pothole region, and it's huge. If you look at this map, which shows it as well, and look at the Delmarva Peninsula over here, you can get some idea of just how big this region is. It's about 300,000 square miles. We live on a peninsula that's 5,000, almost 6,000 square miles. Give you some idea of the size. Covers all of these areas, so it's an international thing between the U.S. and Canada. The Prairie Pothole region was created when the glaciers that used to overlie this area by several miles, the glaciers receded. As they receded, they left chunks of ice, big chunks of ice, that created depressions in the otherwise flat prairie land. These chunks of ice then melted and formed potholes that periodically fill with water, and then in the summertime periodically dry up and then refill, generally by rain and snow melt, and then dry up again. That same kind of cycle that we talked about that they're using down at Blackwater to manage that for waterfowl. These depressions occurred at numbers of about 180 per square mile. So a view of at least some of the original region would look something like this. Average size of a pothole was about 3.5 acres. Some were much bigger, some were quite small. As I said, they annually fill by rainfall and snowmelt, but they may not fill, they may actually go dry in the summer, and in some years when we have droughts, as global warming begins to affect us, they don't fill at all, which leads to trouble for the breeding of birds. Studies show that they support up to 130 duck pairs, various species, per square mile. Among those that like it here are mallards, pintails, gadwalls, blue-winged teal, northern settlers, canvasbacks, redheads, lesser scaup in particular, but there are others as well. It's important not only for breeding waterfowl, but also as a stopover for birds that breed further north and need to stop over in their fall migration. So it's important for that as well. To give you some idea of the importance, it's considered the most important breeding habitat for waterfowl, not in the US, in the world. And 50% of the waterfowl that are hatched and produced in North America breed here. So it's an amazing, amazing area. Here's an example of what it might look like in modern day, a little bit closer up. And you can see that for, at least traditionally, when we began to do agriculture in this area, it was largely livestock. So here we have some cattle of various types, possibly beef cattle, intermingling with whatever is living on these pothole waters. And we'll look at that in a second. So just to show you just how important it is for one of our signature species, this is on the left is the prairie pothole region. On the right is the breeding range, actually the breeding and wintering range of a particularly famous Chesapeake Bay waterfowl. You can see its wintering range includes all the bay and then also parts of the interior and down around the Gulf, but its breeding range models very closely the boundaries of the pothole region, and then there are populations that go up into Alaska. And you can do this for a number of local waterfowl. Some of them have broader distributions in this region here, but again, it's much more scattered. The concentration really is in the prairie potholes. And this bird happens to be our canvas. So our wintering population of canvasback, most likely most of them have bred in the prairie pothole region in the Dakotas and up into Canada. Here's one coming in for a landing. Skinning by some, at least ruddy ducks. This one looks like a scaup in the background here. I can't exactly tell. This one looks like it has a white face and is a scaup. This was taken from a video that was too long to try to save. And here we see them with livestock, which is a nice companion kind of arrangement where the prairie potholes can still do their thing. I can identify a few of the ducks in there, but not well. It's not that sharp a picture. There are a couple of hen mallards in there. There's an American coot right there. And maybe another one over here. You can see the chalky white bill. And then some ruddy ducks with their stiff tails. This is fairly compatible. The ducks get along with beef and the potholes can do their thing. But starting in the post-World War II in particular, industrial agriculture began to invade the prairie pothole region because the soils are very rich. They have a lot of decaying and dying vegetation in them, a lot of organic material. And if the potholes could be drained, you could farm it. And that's what actually started to happen. It also started to affect our wintering waterfowl populations, which really took a dive up and through the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. We were in danger of losing the most important breeding site for all of our waterfowl, and at the expense of draining the pothole regions. And in some areas, let's see if I had some numbers, it was estimated that 50, depending on where you were looking, 50 to 90% of the potholes were lost or severely degraded by the invasion of agriculture. There were attempts to try to rectify this in a way. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has more refuges per square mile in the prairie pothole region than they have anywhere else in the United States. Imagine Blackwater after Blackwater after Blackwater. Even so, this amounted to only 915,000 acres total, or that's about 0.5% of the actual total prairie pothole region. So, despite the fact that we have refuge after refuge after refuge there, okay, and the federal government working on it, in fact, we're not reversing the decline of our waterfowl. Why then are waterfowl increasing according to that terrible paper that came out in 2019? Why is that the only group that's increasing? Well, it has to do with some changes that were made in the Farm Bill of all things back in 1985. Ducks Unlimited, several conservation organizations were working together to try to get landowners to preserve this land instead of use it for agricultural purposes. But they weren't able to offset the loss in savings to the farmers for doing that, the loss of income. In 1985, they were able to convince the USDA to designate the entire United States prairie pothole region, this does not include Canada, as a conservation priority area. That sounds very esoteric, but what that meant was that farmers there would be eligible to conserve that land and get cost sharing from a variety of federal programs. The most common was CRP, Conservation Reserve Program. They could get cost sharing money to take their land out of agriculture and they get paid for that. They would enter into a contract with the government that would last 10 years or more, and they would be compensated by taking the land out. And they did it. They did it in droves. This change in the Farm Bill was seminal to the effect to contributing to the restoration of our duck populations here, not just there. By 1993, remember this change in the Farm Bill was the 1985 Farm Bill. Sounds like ages ago, and yes, it is. But by 1993, 7% of the U.S. prairie pothole region was in conservation reserve programs put in strictly voluntarily by the landowners. And this map shows one dot is 1,000 acres enrolled in the CRP program in the U.S. Pretty extensive, isn't it? It's estimated that that was about 4.7 million acres of former cropland, and the duck nesting succession, I'll show you some data for this in a minute, increased by about 50% in these CRP lands. It's estimated that between 1992 and 97, an additional 10.5 million ducks were recruited from this region as a result of this. Remember before that we're dealing with only 0.5% in wildlife refuges? Now we got 7%. Okay, a huge change. Working with the landowners, not coming in and slapping down federal regulations that say you can't do, rather a much more positive kind of approach. Let's work this out, and here's what we can do with and for you. So here are some data from this particular thing. Here's the US in the 60s, less than Canada because we were beginning to invade those prairie potholes and drain them. We crossed Canada in the 70s. Canada also began to do the same thing, and so it began to fall. But starting in the 80s, when the Farm Bill change occurred, look what happened in the US.
Wow.
We had some bad years, we had some bad drought years in the early 90s, but they bounced right back. Canada, which has no similar kind of legislation, continues to decline. That was the seminal change, and it's the result of what enables us to look at seeing the only group of birds in the last 50 years that has increased has been our wetland birds. Some of that has to do with our waterfowl with programs like this. Some of it has to do with policies that have been adapted about no net loss of wetlands. We used to drain them helter-skelter. No net loss has helped. There's no question about it. But it's this working with local communities and local farmers and finding ways to come up with constructive solutions so that they don't lose tons of money in this process. And at the same time, we conserve a precious resource for us, and we benefit here in Chesapeake Bay, several thousand miles away. Pretty cool.
It really is.
Pretty cool. And we can do it here. In the spring, I can visit Y Farm and some other places where farmers are also now creating grassland habitats. There are other farmers who have voluntarily taken some land out of production to put in wetlands. Some of these private landowners actually get compensated for it because in the Chesapeake Bay region, we may not have just the CRP and the CREP programs for agriculture, but we have all sorts of other types of funding to protect and preserve the Chesapeake Bay by protecting and preserving certain forms of land use. So there are other options, financial options that are available to local landowners as well. The big problem with our situation here is that a lot of farming in particular is done by not tenant farmers, but by renters who rent the land from other land from the landowners. And we have to find ways to get the compensation down to the people who are actually doing the farming, not just the landowners themselves. That's hit or miss. We don't have any regulations or laws to ensure that, but we're doing what we can do. So this slide is just to remind us that we have other financial resources available for landowners who are interested in adopting conservation practices. This is from the president of the American Bird Conservancy, and it's a lesson he often gives when he talks to people in public forums. After going through a variety of conservation type measures and other types of information like that about options that you can do, he concludes by saying you can't protect all habitat, so you have to work with the landowners in production landscapes, in farmland, pasture, and forest. They own the bulk of the land, especially here in the east. We don't have the problems out west with the land, Bureau of Land Management owning a lot of the land out there. Here in the east, it's all in private bid. DNR can't come in and establish refuge after refuge after park after park after park. It can do what it can, and those are important. And if they're targeted, they can make a huge difference. But if we work with the landowners, they're the ones who can make the larger difference on the kind of scale we're talking about. When you're losing 3 billion birds over 50 years, we're talking about large scale kinds of changes, not just small backyard ones. And we have to really begin to think in those kinds of terms. And in doing so, we have to realize the landowners are not our enemy. They're our ally in actually achieving this. And the prairie pothole region shows you good conservation practices work, and they show a mechanism for doing it. And it's a mechanism I hope we can learn to adopt as well. So we wrap up by looking at these guys, a couple of pictures from the course. There's a Van Williamson sent me a few, and there's a dirty-faced canvasback. You know that guy? That's a long tail we saw at Ocean City Inlet, Van's pictures. And in scouting out for the widgeons here over, I think this picture was taken probably at the Bayside pond. A nice hen and a nice drake widgeon. Black butt with the white patch. So I hope those things, plus ending the course on what I hope is a hopeful note.
Yes.
The divisiveness in this country really is not going to solve our problems. We've got to get back together and work with folks. And to the degree that we can, we'll keep our waterfowl here and maybe reverse some of those trends that we saw in the 2019 paper. And anyway, it doesn't matter. We had a good time.
Yeah.